chained and left as bait for alien beasts in the savage jungle. Only one man broke the chains. The sun was dipping behind the dense trees of the jungle, casting long shadows over the thick undergrowth. The air was hot and heavy, carrying the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves. Birds and insects made noises that felt alive, almost as if the forest itself was breathing. In this jungle, far away from any village or road, danger lived in every shadow. A man walked carefully among the trees. His name was Armin, and he was quiet, observant, and strong. He was not a hero, not a soldier, just a man who had learned to survive. He had grown up in small villages, helping his father in the fields, hunting small animals in the forests, and learning how to read the signs of nature. That knowledge would soon save his life, though he did not know it yet. Armin was with a group of men who were moving through the jungle for reasons he didn't fully trust. They were strangers to him, but they had hired him to guide them. Money was scarce, and his family depended on him. He did not ask many questions. He knew that sometimes questions could get you into trouble. The group had a map and some weapons, and they moved fast, cutting through vines and stepping over roots that threatened to trip them at every step. By midday, the sun beat down on them, and sweat ran in rivers down their faces. Armin's legs ached, but he kept going, leading the group carefully around dangerous areas he knew from experience. Patches of quicksand hid under fallen leaves, and large snakes slept in the branches above. The jungle was beautiful in a terrifying way, full of life, yet full of death if one was careless. As the day moved toward evening, the mood of the group changed. The men whispered among themselves and glanced at Armin with a mixture of suspicion and calculation. Something was brewing, though Armin could not yet see it. They stopped near a small river to rest. Armin offered to fish for food, and he managed to catch a small fish, grilling it over a fire he built from dry wood and leaves. The others ate silently, not acknowledging his effort, but he didn't mind. He had long learned that appreciation was rare in this world. Night fell quickly in the jungle. The forest became a shadow of shapes and sounds. Armin could hear animals moving near them, the scuttle of small creatures in the underbrush, the distant roar of a predator, and the cries of birds that never slept. He felt a chill run down his spine, not from cold but from a sense that something was wrong. The other men kept their distance from him, whispering in tones he couldn't understand. Suddenly, without warning, the atmosphere changed. The men around him grew tense. Their movements became sharp and deliberate. Armin noticed them carrying ropes and chains, their faces shadowed by the moonlight filtering through the trees. He felt a jolt of fear, but it was mixed with a calm understanding. He had always known this could happen in such dangerous places. Before he could react, strong hands grabbed him. He struggled, but there were too many of them. In minutes, he found himself chained to a thick tree, the cold metal biting into his wrists. Panic rose in his chest, but he forced himself to breathe steadily. He had been trapped before, though never like this, and he knew that panic could be more deadly than any predator. One of the men stepped forward, his face cruel and calculating. "You'll stay here," he said, voice low and harsh. "While the jungle takes care of the rest, don't expect anyone to come back for you." They laughed, a sound that was harsh and empty in the vast darkness. Armin could only watch as the group disappeared into the forest, their footsteps swallowed quickly by the sounds of the night. The jungle was suddenly silent, but not comforting. Shadows seemed to move on their own. The air was thick, carrying 100 different scents: flowers, earth, wet wood, and the sharp tang of blood from unknown sources. Armin strained his ears, listening for the approach of danger. He could hear nothing yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time. The predators of the jungle did not wait for humans. They hunted by instinct, by smell, by movement. Hours passed, and Armin felt the first sting of hunger. He had not eaten much that day, and the small fish from the river had only given him a small amount of strength. He looked around, his mind scanning the area for anything that could help him. There were vines that could be used to make simple tools, stones that could cut or break, and the chains themselves that might have weak spots. He touched the metal, feeling for any imperfections, any opportunity. Night deepened. Sounds grew closer. The scuttling of small animals became louder. The rustle of leaves hinted at larger creatures moving nearby. Armin's heart beat fast, but he focused. He remembered stories his father had told him about surviving in the wild, about how animals sense fear and weakness. He reminded himself that he could not show weakness, that he had to keep his mind sharp. Hours became longer. Armin's arms grew tired from the chains, the cuts on his wrists stinging with every movement. The cold night air seeped through his clothes, chilling him to the bone. He shivered but refused to give in to despair. He began to move slowly, testing the chains, pulling, twisting, trying to find a way to loosen them without making too much noise. Every small movement was a battle, but he persisted. From the darkness, sounds of life moved closer. Armin could hear the snapping of twigs, the soft patting of paws, and low growls. He realized he was no longer just a man chained to a tree. He was prey in the middle of a forest that wanted him dead. His survival depended not on strength alone, but on cunning, patience, and knowledge of the jungle. He remembered a small lesson from his youth: animals notice patterns. If you move too much or show fear, they will strike. He stayed still, listening, breathing slowly. The sounds moved past him, sometimes circling, sometimes retreating. He felt the presence of creatures larger than himself, unknown to him, but somehow he felt he could read them just a little. He was not completely alone. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The moon moved across the sky, casting silver light on his face. He thought of his family, his parents, his siblings, the small home he had worked so hard to support. Those thoughts gave him strength. He would not die here, not like this, not while he still remembered how to fight. By dawn, exhaustion pressed on him. His arms were raw from the chains, his stomach growled, and his eyes were heavy. Yet his mind remained alert. He knew he needed to act, to find a way to survive, and he began planning. He studied the chains carefully, touched the ground, tested the vines and stones around him. His mind was sharp despite his body being weak. In the quiet moments before sunrise, he realized something important. The jungle was not just a place of danger. It was a teacher. It tested him, but it also gave him tools. Stones, vines, even the branches of the trees could become allies if he used them wisely. The predators would come, but if he stayed calm and used his knowledge, he could survive. When the sun finally rose, a pale light filtering through the trees, Armin felt a small spark of hope. He was still chained, still surrounded by danger, but he had survived the first night. That was a victory. The jungle had not broken him, and the men who had left him here would not see him fail. With the first light, he began working on the chains again, using a sharp stone he had found nearby. Pain shot through his wrists, but he gritted his teeth and continued. Each movement was careful, precise. He tested the metal for weak spots, twisted the links, and pulled with all his strength. The jungle was alive around him, and he moved in harmony with it, not against it. By the end of the first day, Armin had learned something crucial. He was not just a victim. He was a fighter, a survivor. The jungle was dangerous, yes, but it also had rules, and he knew how to use them. As night approached again, he felt a small sense of control, small victories that gave him the strength to continue. The men who had chained him were gone. The predators of the night were waiting. But Armin had discovered something more powerful than chains or fear. He had discovered his own will to live. And that would be his greatest weapon in the days to come. Armin woke before the sun fully rose, his body aching and his wrists still raw from the chains. The first night had been the hardest, but he had survived. The cool morning air brought no relief from the pain, only a quiet reminder that the jungle never slept. Every rustle of leaves, every distant call of a bird, every movement in the shadows could mean danger. He knew he could not stay idle. To survive, he needed to act, and act carefully. The chains around his wrists were heavy and biting into his skin, but he had spent the night learning their weakness. There was a small spot where the metal had been slightly corroded by water, a small imperfection. He tested it again and again, twisting and pulling slowly, careful not to make too much noise. Every snap or crack could draw unwanted attention from predators, or worse, humans who might still be nearby. He noticed small details in the jungle he had missed the night before. Tiny insects crawling over the ground, leaves that rustled differently under weight, shadows that moved with the wind. Everything told a story. Armin had grown up observing life like this. Hunting small animals in his village had taught him patience and attention to detail. Now that skill was the difference between life and death. By mid-morning, he had managed to loosen the chain slightly. It was still tight and painful, but progress mattered. He rested his arms for a moment, stretching and letting the circulation return. His stomach growled. He had eaten little the day before, and now hunger pressed on him like a weight. He looked around for edible plants, roots, or any small creatures he could catch. The jungle offered little comfort. Most fruits were poisonous, and small animals were quick. but he was patient. He spotted movement near a fallen tree. A small lizard scurried across the mossy surface. His eyes sharpened. Using a stick he had broken off from a nearby branch, he managed to trap the lizard, and with careful hands he killed it for food. The small meal was nothing, but it gave him energy. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, knowing he needed strength for what was coming. The sun climbed higher and the jungle grew hotter. Sweat ran down his face, dripping into his eyes, making him squint. The sounds of the forest were louder now, birds calling, insects buzzing, monkeys chattering in the high branches. But beneath the everyday sounds of life, Armin sensed something darker. The jungle was aware of him. Predators were near. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching. Time passed slowly and the heat made him drowsy. He leaned against the tree, chains pressing into his skin, and tried to rest while staying alert. Every noise made him tense. A branch snapped and he froze. His eyes darted to the movement. A small wild cat padded past, its fur blending perfectly with the fallen leaves. It glanced at him, curious but uninterested, and then disappeared into the underbrush. The sight reminded him that this was not a place for mistakes. As afternoon arrived, Armin knew he needed to plan his next move. He could not remain chained all day. The predators would not wait forever, and neither would the men who had left him. He studied the surrounding area. The tree he was chained to was near a small creek, and the water could provide both a resource and a tool. If he could loosen the chain enough, he might be able to slip it over his wrist and use the river to help hide his movements. He began working slowly, twisting the chain against the corroded link. Pain shot through his arms, but he ignored it. His mind was entirely focused on survival. He remembered a lesson from his youth. When struggling, small and steady actions often succeed where brute force fails. He moved the chain millimeter by millimeter, testing its limits, feeling for the right angle. Hours passed, but his patience never broke. As the day turned toward evening, the jungle shifted again. The heat of the sun faded, leaving a coolness in the air. Shadows grew longer and the calls of predators became sharper. A pair of eyes shone from the darkness near the creek. Armin froze. His heart pounded in his chest, but he did not panic. He remembered that animals often watch for movement. He stayed still, silent as the grave, until the eyes disappeared into the shadows. Hunger pressed on him again, stronger this time. He had little left to eat. He noticed a cluster of berries nearby. They looked small and harmless. He tested one cautiously, touching it to his tongue and waiting. No burning, no bitterness, no sickness followed. He ate carefully, one by one, knowing the jungle would not forgive a mistake. The berries gave him just enough energy to keep working. Night fell again and the jungle became alive with sounds of nocturnal predators. Insects chirped loudly, frogs croaked, and somewhere in the distance, a low growl rolled through the trees. Armin could feel his exhaustion, but he pushed it aside. The chain was his enemy, but he was learning it, studying it, understanding it. Using the sharp stone he had found earlier, he began filing at the corroded link. Each stroke caused pain, but progress came slowly, surely. As he worked, he thought about the men who had left him. He did not feel hatred, not yet. Hatred wastes energy, and energy was what he needed most. Instead, he focused on the future, freedom. The thought of his family, of seeing them again, gave him strength. He remembered his father's advice. The mind is stronger than the body, and courage is stronger than fear. Armin held onto that lesson tightly, as though it were a lifeline. Hours passed in a blur of effort and exhaustion. The jungle seemed to test him, sending sounds of rustling leaves, distant roars, and the occasional cry of a bird to keep him alert. His arms were numb, his skin torn, but he refused to stop. Each movement, each tiny filing of the metal was a victory. He reminded himself that patience and persistence always outlast fear. At some point in the night, a sudden sound made him freeze completely. Leaves rustled violently near the base of the tree. He held his breath, barely daring to blink. A wild dog, lean and hungry, emerged from the shadows. Its teeth gleamed in the moonlight and its eyes locked on him. Armin remained motionless. He remembered how animals hunt. They look for fear, weakness, or distraction. He gave none. Slowly the dog circled, sniffed, and eventually, uninterested, vanished back into the forest. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared, Armin had made a breakthrough. The chain had loosened just enough that he could move his hands slightly. It was not freedom, but it was hope. He flexed his fingers carefully, testing the strength of the metal and the link. He knew the next step would require courage, careful planning, and strength he was not sure he had. Yet he felt a spark of determination. The jungle was cruel, but he had learned to move with it, not against it. The morning sun finally broke through the thick canopy, spilling golden light across the forest floor. Armin's body was battered, his arms sore, and his stomach empty, but he had survived another night. The first night had taught him that survival depended on observation, patience, and using every small advantage the jungle offered. He understood the rhythm of the forest, the movements of predators, and even the way the air carried sound. Knowledge had become his shield. As he prepared for another day of struggle, Armin took a moment to observe the forest around him. The small creek reflected sunlight in patches, offering both hope and danger. Predators would be awake soon, and the men who had left him might return. He realized that survival was not just about strength, it was about strategy. The jungle tested him in every way, but he now had a plan. One step at a time, he would break the chain, escape, and live to see another day. By late morning, Armin had managed to slip his wrist slightly in the chain. It was painful and risky, but he knew he had to keep moving. Every small victory gave him confidence. He studied the forest floor, noting roots, vines, and fallen branches that could serve as tools. He even spotted small insects working together, teaching him lessons about patience, persistence, and focus. Life was everywhere, even in the smallest details, and Armin learned from it all. As the day moved forward, he began testing his surroundings. The chain was heavy, but by twisting and pulling carefully, he slowly shifted his position. Every movement required thought, caution, and timing. He could hear the calls of birds above, the rustle of small animals, and the distant roar of predators. The jungle was alive, and it watched him, but Armin had changed too. He was no longer just a man in chains. He was a survivor, learning, adapting, preparing for freedom. By nightfall, exhaustion weighed him down again, but he did not give up. He rested briefly, breathing slowly, and prepared for another night in the jungle. He had survived the first night, learned the rhythm of the forest, found food, and even made progress with the chain. Hope, fragile but alive, burned in his heart. The jungle was savage, the men were cruel, but Armin had discovered something stronger, his own will to survive. Night came again, thick and dark, swallowing the jungle in shadows. The air was cooler now, but heavy with moisture. Every leaf, every branch, every movement seemed louder in the stillness. Armin's arms ached from the chains, his wrists raw and bleeding, but his determination had grown stronger. He had survived 2 nights, and now he felt that something was about to change. The jungle, which had seemed endless and merciless, was teaching him lessons in patience, observation, and endurance. He shifted slightly, testing the chain once again. The metal link, corroded by rain and age, resisted his movements, but he had found its weakness. Slowly, carefully, he twisted it, feeling the grinding of metal against metal. The pain shot up his arms, but he ignored it. Every second counted, every tiny movement mattered. In the silence, the jungle seemed to hold its breath with him, as if watching his struggle. The sounds of the night had changed. The usual rustling of small animals was now accompanied by low growls and the snapping of twigs. Armin knew the predators were near. The jungle was no longer just a teacher, it was a trial. Eyes in the darkness watched him, testing his courage, and every nerve in his body was alert. He remembered a lesson from hunting in his youth: predators do not attack unless they sense weakness. He would show none. Pain became his constant companion. His arms throbbed, his shoulders burned, and his fingers were raw from gripping the chains. Hunger gnawed at him, but he focused on one thing: freedom. He remembered his family, their faces, and the small home he had left behind. Those memories were more powerful than fear. They gave him strength. Even in the darkest moments, he reminded himself that life was worth fighting for. Hours passed as he worked. Every so often he paused to listen. A soft rustle, a distant roar, the flutter of wings, all signs of the forest's activity. He noted them carefully, planning his movements. One wrong move, and he could draw a predator too close or make himself a target for the men who had left him. Patience was his weapon now, and he wielded it carefully. The first real danger came in the form of a wild cat, sleek and silent, moving through the underbrush. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, and it crouched, muscles tense, ready to strike. Armin froze. He could feel his heartbeat pounding in his chest, but he did not panic. Slowly, he shifted his body, making himself appear calm and still. The cat circled, sniffing the air, testing him, then, finding no easy target, it melted back into the jungle. Armin exhaled quietly, relief mixed with adrenaline. Survival was never guaranteed, but he was learning how to claim it. By the time dawn broke, Armin had made significant progress. The chain around his wrists was no longer tight against the bone. He could flex his fingers slightly, enough to give him leverage. The pain was constant but manageable. He rested briefly, observing the forest in the soft morning light. The jungle seemed to change with the sun, shadows shrank, sounds shifted, and movement became easier to detect. Each day brought both danger and opportunity, and Armin learned to read it all. He needed food. The small lizard he had caught 2 nights ago would not sustain him for long. Carefully, he searched for edible plants and berries, testing each one before eating. He found small roots and insects, enough to give him strength for the work ahead. His stomach growled, but he ignored hunger in favor of focus. Every bite, every movement was preparation for freedom. Late in the afternoon, the real test came. A low growl echoed through the trees, closer than before. Armin stiffened. He could see shadows moving, hear the heavy steps of predators approaching. A pack of wild dogs emerged, lean and hungry, their eyes fixed on him. He knew they could tear him apart in minutes if he made a mistake. He remained still, breathing slowly, watching their movements. He remembered how predators hunt in packs. They look for fear, for weakness, for a chance to strike first. Armin showed none. Slowly, he shifted slightly, testing the chain again, calculating his next move. The dogs circled, sniffing, growling low. He held his ground, silent and motionless, until finally, after tense minutes that felt like hours, they retreated, uninterested in the struggle. Night fell once more, heavier and darker than before. Armin's body was exhausted. His muscles ached and his wrists burned, but he refused to stop. Using a sharp stone he had found near the creek, he began filing at the corroded link of the chain. Pain shot through his arms with every stroke, but he gritted his teeth and continued. He could hear animals moving around him, some curious, some hunting, but he kept his focus. Hours dragged on, sweat mixed with blood on his hands. His fingers were sore and swollen. Every movement of the chain felt like a battle. The jungle, which had seemed endless and oppressive, now became his partner. Every noise, every rustle, every shadow became a signal, a guide. He moved with care, timing each motion with the rhythm of the forest. At one point, a heavy branch fell near him, startling him. His heart raced, but he remained still, watching. A pair of glowing eyes appeared briefly in the darkness, then vanished. The jungle tested him constantly, but Armin had learned its lessons well. He was no longer just a man trapped in chains. He was a survivor, adapting to the rhythm of life and death around him. Midnight approached, and fatigue threatened to take him. He leaned against the tree, breathing slowly, muscles shaking. But then he remembered the faces of his family, the small home he had left behind, the life that awaited him if he could survive. That thought became fuel for his determination. He could not fail. The jungle had tested him long enough. It was time to act. Using all his remaining strength, he twisted the chain with the sharp stone, applying pressure on the weak link. Pain tore through his arms, but he refused to stop. Hours passed as he worked carefully, methodically. Every tiny movement brought him closer to freedom. His body screamed, but his mind was sharper than ever. He imagined slipping the chains, running to the creek, and disappearing into the forest. That vision pushed him forward. Finally, as the first light of dawn touched the jungle floor, there was a small snap. The weak link gave way, and the chain loosened enough for Armin to pull his wrist free. He gasped, relief flooding his body, but he did not celebrate. Freedom was not complete. The jungle was still full of danger, and he needed to move carefully. He studied his surroundings. The predators had not returned yet, and the men who had left him were likely far away. But he knew he could not linger. Slowly, cautiously, he removed the chains completely, feeling the raw skin of his wrists as he did so. The pain was sharp, but it was a small price for the taste of freedom. Now free, Armin faced a new challenge, moving through the jungle without attracting attention. Every step had to be careful, every movement calculated. He crept toward the creek, using the water to mask his scent, knowing that predators often track by smell. He moved quietly, alert to every sound, every shadow, every movement in the trees above. Hours passed as he navigated the dense forest. Hunger and fatigue pressed on him, but he pushed forward, driven by the thought of life beyond the jungle. He found small fruits, drank cautiously from the creek, and used the natural cover of vines and trees to stay hidden. The jungle was alive, but he had learned to move like it, not against it. By midday, he paused in a small clearing. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting patches of warmth on the forest floor. He looked back at the path he had traveled, the tree where he had been chained, and the struggle he had endured. It had been long, exhausting, and terrifying, but he had survived. For the first time, he allowed himself a small sense of pride. He had faced the jungle, faced the chains, and faced death, and he had not failed. The next steps were clear. He needed to find a safe place to rest, to heal, and to plan his journey back to civilization. The jungle was still dangerous, but now he was no longer just a man trapped. He was a survivor, armed with knowledge, strength, and determination. Every moment in the forest had taught him something new, and he carried those lessons with him as he moved forward. Night approached again, but Armin was ready. He found a small cluster of rocks and vines, creating a simple shelter to hide and rest. The predators roamed nearby, but he was calm. He had learned their patterns, their habits, their signals. He could rest without fear of immediate attack. As he settled down, he reflected on the nights he had endured, the pain he had felt, and the courage he had found within himself. For the first time since he had been chained, he felt hope. The jungle had tested him, the predators had circled him, and the chains had bound him. But he had broken free. His mind was sharp, his body weary but strong, and his spirit unbroken. He was no longer just a man struggling to survive. He was a fighter, a survivor, a man who would see another day. The first light of morning filtered through the dense canopy of the jungle. Armin stretched his aching body, feeling the soreness in every muscle. His wrists throbbed, scarred from the chains he had broken the night before, but the pain was nothing compared to the relief and determination he now carried. The jungle was no longer just a place of fear. It was now a path to his freedom if he could navigate it carefully. He paused to drink from the creek, feeling the cold water wash over his hands and face. The forest around him was alive with sound, birds calling to one another, insects buzzing near the undergrowth, and somewhere in the distance, the low growl of a predator. Armin knew he could not move too quickly, yet he could not afford to linger. Every moment he stayed in one place increased the risk of being discovered, whether by wild animals or humans. Using the lessons he had learned during his time chained to the tree, he moved carefully, placing each foot deliberately to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. He adjusted his clothing to blend with the forest, using mud and leaves to cover the scent of his movement. The jungle had become an ally in his survival. Its vines, branches, and shadows were now tools for concealment and strategy. Hours passed as he made his way deeper into the forest. Hunger and exhaustion pressed on him, but he ignored the discomfort, focusing on the rhythm of the jungle. He found small fruits and roots, testing them carefully before eating. Each bite gave him strength, and each step reinforced his determination to survive. He knew that finding a safe place to rest was crucial, but he also knew that hesitation could be deadly. As midday approached, Armin spotted signs of human activity in the distance, faint footprints in the mud and broken branches that suggested someone had recently passed. He slowed his pace, crouching behind a cluster of bushes to observe. The tracks were old enough that he could move without immediate danger, but they reminded him that the men who had left him chained were still in the forest, possibly nearby. Caution became his guide. He decided to follow a narrow path along the edge of a small stream, keeping low and moving silently. The water offered not only a source of hydration, but also a natural guide through the dense jungle. Every few minutes he paused to listen, to smell the air, and to study the shadows around him. Predators moved in patterns he had learned to recognize, and he adjusted his movements to avoid crossing their paths. By late afternoon, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the jungle floor. Armin reached a small clearing, where the ground was drier and easier to move across. Here, he took a moment to rest, leaning against a large tree and closing his eyes briefly. The cool breeze on his face was a welcome relief from the stifling heat of the undergrowth. As he rested, he considered his next move. He could not remain in one place for too long. He had to find shelter, food, and a route toward civilization. In the distance, he noticed a ridge that might lead to higher ground. Higher ground could provide a better vantage point to see the surrounding jungle and spot any potential threats. Carefully, he began to make his way toward it, stepping over roots and crouching beneath low branches. His body was tired, but his mind was alert, constantly calculating, observing, and planning. Every movement was deliberate, every decision critical. As he climbed, he heard the distant cries of monkeys echoing through the trees. Their voices were a reminder that he was not alone in the jungle, but he also knew that they could alert predators to his presence. He moved quietly, avoiding sudden movements, and kept his focus on reaching the ridge safely. The climb was difficult, his legs burning with effort, but he refused to give up. At the top of the ridge, Armin finally paused to survey the surrounding area. From this vantage point, he could see the dense forest stretching in all directions, with patches of sunlight breaking through the canopy. In the distance, he noticed a thin column of smoke rising, perhaps a sign of human habitation. His heart raced with hope. Civilization could be within reach, but he could not rush. Moving too quickly might reveal him to both animals and humans who could be dangerous. He spent the next hours descending carefully toward the source of the smoke, using the jungle to conceal his movements. He crossed shallow streams, avoided patches of quicksand, and maneuvered around large predators he spotted from a distance. His survival skills, honed during his childhood and tested by the past days, guided him through every challenge. The jungle was still dangerous, but he now had the confidence to navigate it successfully. By evening, he reached a narrow path that led toward the smoke. The path appeared to be used occasionally, perhaps by villagers or hunters. Armin moved cautiously along it, staying low and listening for any signs of life nearby. His stomach ached with hunger, but he ignored it, knowing that safety and strategy came first. The jungle had taught him patience, and he would need it until he was truly safe. As darkness fell, Armin found a small cluster of rocks and dense foliage that provided natural shelter. Here, he could rest without being easily seen by predators or humans. He gathered dry leaves and branches to create a simple bed and used mud to cover his scent. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but he allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He had survived the chains, the predators, and the jungle itself. Now he was close to freedom, but he knew the final challenges were still ahead. During the night, he remained alert. Sounds of the forest were louder in the darkness, rustling leaves, distant howls, and the snapping of branches. Armin's senses were sharper than ever. He listened carefully, using the patterns of the jungle to guide his rest. He slept lightly, ready to react at any sign of danger. The nights had taught him that even a moment of carelessness could be deadly. Morning arrived with a soft glow over the jungle. Armin packed his small shelter, gathering enough leaves and branches to camouflage himself as he moved. He drank from the creek one last time before setting out. His path toward the smoke and potential civilization was still fraught with danger, but he had learned to navigate the jungle with confidence and caution. Each step brought him closer to safety, and his resolve never wavered. As he approached the area near the smoke, he encountered small signs of human activity: footprints, discarded leaves, and broken branches. Armin moved carefully, avoiding open areas and using the trees as cover. His senses were attuned to every detail, every sound, and every shadow. The jungle had taught him vigilance, and he now applied it with precision. By midday, he spotted a small clearing with a modest village in the distance. Smoke rose from several huts, and people could be seen moving about. Armin felt a surge of relief and hope. Civilization was within reach, but he approached cautiously. He did not know whether the villagers were friendly or hostile. He remained hidden, observing their movements and planning the safest way to make contact. Finally, he chose a path through the undergrowth that allowed him to approach the village unseen. He moved silently, stepping over roots and crouching beneath low branches. Every movement was deliberate, every decision cautious. The jungle had taught him patience, and he now applied it to interacting with humans. His goal was safety, not confrontation. As he reached the edge of the village, a young boy spotted him. The boy froze, then ran to alert the villagers. Armin remained still, hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. The villagers approached cautiously, but soon recognized him as a man in need. They offered water, food, and shelter, and Armin gratefully accepted. For the first time in days, he felt a sense of security. He told them a simple story of being lost in the jungle and surviving on his own. The villagers listened in awe, offering small comforts and advice. Armin rested, ate, and regained strength, knowing that the hardest part of his journey, The escape from the chains and the jungle was behind him. He had survived against the odds using skill, patience, and determination. As night fell over the village, Armin looked toward the dark outline of the jungle. He had faced its dangers, learned its lessons, and come out alive. The jungle had tested him, but he had not only survived, it had made him stronger. He was no longer just a man escaping danger. He was a survivor, ready to return to the world beyond the forest.